Medical disclaimer. The information presented in this channel is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical diagnostic or prescribing procedures.
Ancel Keys The Lie. Heart disease feels like a permanent feature of modern life, but it wasn't always that way. In the late 1800s, coronary heart disease was rare, and most people died from infections rather than chronic vascular problems. Today, coronary heart disease sits at the center of cardiovascular mortality, bringing chest pain, breathlessness, fatigue, and sudden heart attacks that often appear after years of silent damage. In the 1960s and 1970s, a debate emerged over the causes of heart disease. On one side, John Yudkin argued that the sugar being added to our food by the processed food industry was the chief culprit. On the other side, Ancel Keys, who attacked Yudkin's work, argued that it was due to saturated fat and cholesterol. Ancel Keys won, Yudkin's work was largely dismissed, and Keys became nutritional dogma. A large part of Keys' victory was based on his study of 7 countries: Italy, Greece, former Yugoslavia, Netherlands, Finland, America, and Japan, which showed that as saturated fat consumption increased, heart disease increased in a linear fashion. However, this result was simply a product of the countries Keys chose, because if Finland, Israel, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, France, and Sweden had been chosen, the opposite correlation would have been found. Leaders in the field of natural medicine have made a strong case that this spike came from the mass adoption of seed oils at last being discussed on the mainstream news. Fortunately, it's gradually become recognized that Keys did not accurately report his data. For example, recently an unpublished 56-month randomized study of 9,423 adults living in state mental hospitals or a nursing home, which made it possible to rigidly control their diets, that Keys directed was unearthed. It found that replacing half of one's animal saturated fats with seed oil, corn oil, soy oil, and others lowered their cholesterol, but for every 30 points it dropped, their risk of death increased by 22%, which roughly translates to each 1% drop in cholesterol raising the risk of death by 1%. Additional note, another unpublished study from the 1970s of 458 Australians found that partially replacing dietary saturated fat with seed oils increased the risk of dying by 17.6%. Likewise, recently, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world published internal sugar industry documents. They showed the sugar industry had used bribes to make scientists place the blame for heart disease on fat, so Yudkin's work would not threaten the sugar industry. Remarkably, it is now generally accepted that Yudkin was right, but nonetheless, our medical guidelines are still largely based on Keys' work. Likewise, the need to lower cholesterol to prevent heart disease is still a dogma within cardiology, despite things like this Lancet study, which in 1986 showed. During 10 years of follow-up from December 1st, 1986 to October 1st, 1996, a total of 642 participants died. Each 1 millimole per liter increase in total cholesterol corresponded to a 15% decrease in mortality. Conclusion: humans have been misled for more than 50 years about heart disease and fat consumption. Finally, by 2026 things are turning around, and it is clear now, according to the latest research and the buried and suppressed truth about saturated fats, that saturated fats are as healthy as have always been for centuries of human history. How many lives could have been saved if the truth about saturated fats would have never been suppressed by the oil industry and its search for profits? Recommendations: do not fear animal protein and saturated fats, always consumed in moderation, and stop using the so-called vegetable oils. In fact, they are not from vegetables, but from seeds. Soy, corn, sunflower, safflower, canola, and all other seed oils. Use grass-fed butter, tallow, and coconut oil for cooking, and dismiss the usage of seed oil in your diet and in your kitchen. Your health will improve.